Wife was accused of holding hands with another man by a coworker, but her memory and phone say otherwise. Who do I trust? My wife, 36F, and I, 40 male, have been together 5 years and got married last year. We definitely have our ups and downs, but we're generally happy. On Friday she went out with people from her work for Christmas drinks and arrived home around midnight absolutely hammered. She just said she'd had a good time and went straight to bed. Yesterday I got a message on Instagram from an anonymous account claiming to be one of her colleagues saying she'd been flirting all night with one of the guys from the office, 44M, and they'd left together at about 9 to walk to the train station. The colleague had a couple more drinks for then went to the station herself, and says she saw my wife walking hand in hand with the guy through the station at about 10:45. They didn't see her. Last night I showed her the message and asked her for an explanation. She claims she was so drunk she doesn't remember anything that happened after about 8 p.m. I asked if she went somewhere with the guy after they left the group and she checked the location history on her phone which confirmed that they had gone to a bar near the station for about an hour. They arrived at the station at 10:40. She gave me her phone and insisted I check it and there were no suspicious messages or anything. As far as I could tell she doesn't have the guy's number in her phone and they're not following each other on Instagram or friends on Facebook. I asked if she was flirting with him and she admitted that she was talking mostly to him all night, but that's just because he's the only person in her office she has anything in common with and that they're just friends and it wasn't flirting. She's mentioned this guy to me before and said how much they have in common. I asked if they were holding hands and she said she doesn't remember but she doesn't think so. She claims to know who sent me the message and says it's a woman in the office who hates her although she doesn't know why. Update 1. Sam came home from work on Monday and casually said that she'd spoken with the guy, Tom, and he'd confirmed that they hadn't held hands, they'd just been walking arm in arm because she was drunk and wearing heels. I asked why her colleague, Helen, would make an Instagram account, track me down, and message me saying they held hands if it wasn't true. She said Helen is basically in love with Tom and made a pass at him just after his divorce but he rejected her. I asked why Helen would feel threatened by her. She said because her and Tom are friends and Helen's a crazy jealous bitch as evidenced by the Instagram message. I asked why she went for a drink just her and Tom. She said that according to Tom they walked past this bar with an amazing live band playing so they stopped in for a drink. Her only regret was doing too many shots too early and getting shit-faced. The next day she went shopping after work and came home with a new dress. I asked what the occasion was and she said her work Christmas party. Last week was just drinks with people from her office. The company Christmas party is on Friday. Apparently she'd mentioned this. I hardly slept that night. The next day I decided to reply to the Instagram message to get some more info. I asked, do you think anything's going on with them? Helen, I assume, quickly replied with a long message saying that they flirt at work and everyone's noticed. Apparently Sam was going to be let go but Tom put in a good word so she kept her job. Tom protects her in the office and will constantly defend her. She also said that Sam bitches about me to the whole office and it's clear we don't have a happy marriage. I asked if she was going to the Christmas party and she said she was. She said she'd update me if anything happened. Sam finished work early on Friday so she had time to get ready. She looked amazing and I really didn't want her to go but I felt like I couldn't say anything. I got an Instagram message about midnight saying that Sam and Tom hadn't interacted at the party but that people from the office had decided to leave and go to a different bar. They all left just before 11 and were at the new bar by 10 past. Sam and Tom turned up just before midnight. Sam arrived home about 2 a.m. not quite as drunk as last time and went straight to sleep. I pretended to be fast asleep. I looked at the location history on her phone. After leaving the venue she'd taken a 3-mile detour to a residential street, stayed for half an hour, then gone to the bar. I sent the address to Helen. She didn't reply until the next morning when she said it was Tom's house. When Sam woke up I just asked her straight out if she cheated on me with Tom last night. She angrily denied it. I told her that I knew she'd been to Tom's house. She accused me of spying on her. Called me controlling. Said she was going to stay with her sister. I demanded an explanation and she said she went to his house so they could smoke a joint before heading to the bar. Then she stormed out. She wouldn't reply to my messages or answer my calls all day Sunday. I called her sister who said she hadn't seen her, but she texted me later that she'd spoken to Sam and she was okay. Sam came home yesterday morning. I asked where she'd been and she just said she couldn't do this anymore and wants a divorce. She went to start packing some clothes while I tried to get her to talk to me. I asked if she was leaving me for Tom. She once again denied anything inappropriate had happened between them but said my jealousy was the final straw. It's clear I don't trust her. I'm controlling. I take her for granted. She's deeply unhappy. Has been for a while. So she's gone. It looks like I'll be spending my first Christmas alone. I have no idea if she was telling the truth or if it was an affair. Weirdly I'm not feeling too bad today so maybe this is for the best. Once she was gone Sam blocked me on all her social media and refused to return my messages or answer my calls. I ended up traveling to the other side of the country to spend Christmas with my parents. On Christmas Eve Sam came home and took more of her stuff. I watched her on our security cameras. I tried phoning her but she ignored my calls. Christmas wasn't great and my parents were both shocked and in denial about what had happened. They had no idea we were having issues and insisted Sam would come to her senses and come home. Eventually I just said she'd met someone else. I returned home on the 27th. I'd been getting sporadic updates from Sam's sister just letting me know she's alright but without any details. Before all this happened we'd made plans to spend New Year's Eve at Sam's favorite bar in the city. I went on my own but she didn't show up. On Tuesday night I received an Instagram message from Helen saying that Sam and Tom had arrived at work together in Tom's car. I didn't bother replying. On Wednesday night she sent another message saying Sam was poisoning the office against her and that Tom was pushing upper management to transfer her to another office or get rid of her. She begged me to do something. I texted Sam and said we needed to talk but she didn't reply, so the next day I called her work switchboard, gave a fake name, and got put through. I could tell she wasn't happy to hear my voice but she agreed to meet up after work at a local pub and talk. I got there early and she arrived 25 minutes late. She apologized for ignoring my calls and said she still cares about me and wants to end things on good terms. I said just tell me the truth. She promised that she wasn't having an affair with Tom and they were just friends. She admitted that they talk a lot in the office but insisted it wasn't an emotional affair. She understands why I was suspicious after the Instagram message but said I should have accepted her denial and trusted her. She has a lot of male friends but she felt like she couldn't hang out with them because I'd get jealous. I pointed out that I've never told her not to hang out with anyone but she said I'd be in a mood whenever she'd hang out with a guy friend. She feels like we only got married to try and fix a relationship that was already broken. Our conversations have devolved into small talk and we've drifted apart. I said I'd heard that she and Tom arrived at work together. Sam said she went to Tom's after I accused her of cheating and knew it was over between us. They spent the weekend together and agreed that they'd make a better couple than we did. She needed me to know that nothing happened between them until after she'd told me she wanted a divorce. And now they were together. And she wanted me to hear it from her before I saw it on social media. Tom was waiting outside for her in the car. All I could do was stand up and walk out. Sam texted me saying she knew I was upset but not to do anything stupid. I blocked her number. I'm not gonna lie, it was a rough night. The next day I was just numb. Didn't really do much. Over the weekend I dug out our marriage certificate so I can start divorce proceedings. I've no idea what to say to Helen so I haven't replied. I think the plan now is to try and find a new job closer to my hometown. I moved across the country to live with Sam and I've never really felt settled here. I also don't want to run into her and Tom around town. Luckily we rent. Update 2. I've finally spoken to the clinic manager and it seems this is all down to my own stupidity. When our last embryo didn't take, we signed all the paperwork a few weeks later to do the final transfer. My wife then developed some hormonal issues so we paused the process until she could get it sorted out. Then for various reasons we decided not to proceed with the transfer, which she told the clinic. Apparently they just paused the process for up to 3 years in order to protect our deposit, and the consent forms remained valid. My wife had the transfer 6 weeks ago. My ex-wife is pregnant with our first child due on Christmas Eve. There's more detail in my profile but essentially we broke up last Christmas and I moved back in with my parents 200 plus miles away. She started a relationship with a coworker which caused so much drama at her work that in February she reached a mutual agreement that she would immediately resign in exchange for 6 months' salary. The relationship ended and she used the settlement money to restart the IVF process we'd paused years earlier. When I found out she was pregnant I contacted the IVF clinic who explained that the contracts we'd signed at the start of the process were still valid and they hadn't done anything wrong. I disagreed and thanks to the advice/recommendations of our legal advice I hired solicitors specializing in clinical negligence and contract law. They managed to negotiate a settlement with the clinic in lieu of legal action, and my ex and I ended up with about £80,000 each after fees. Plus the clinic updated their processes to require consent be reconfirmed by both parties before any embryo transfer takes place. For the last 4 months I've been in regular contact with my ex, discussing settlement negotiations and traveling down south for scans. When I asked why she did it she just said that she knew this was her last chance to have a baby and when she came into some money she took it as a sign that she should go ahead with the embryo transfer before I remembered to withdraw consent. She's since been diagnosed with bipolar disorder which in her mind has absolved her of any responsibility for her actions. She's desperate for us to get back together and raise our son as a family. I'm not interested in being a couple but I obviously don't want to be 200 miles away from my son. I've got a new job so I really didn't want to move back down to Hampshire, but she was willing to move up to Yorkshire as long as we lived together, so we agreed to spend the settlement money on a house in my hometown. I picked up the keys last week and I've been furnishing/decorating in preparation for us moving in next week. My ex has no friends or family around here and no job. Us living together is going to be super awkward but once the baby comes I'm hoping we can get into a co-parenting routine. The new house has 3 bedrooms so we'll have one each and one for our son. We've agreed not to see other people for at least 3 years. Her request: what's the best way to navigate this situation? We're both very excited to be parents and I hope I'm making the best of a shitty situation but it's obviously fraught with potential pitfalls. Update 3. It was a strange feeling reading all the replies saying what a mistake I was making after putting in so much thought and spending lots of time and effort to get where I was. Someone sent me a link to a TikTok of my previous posts. Hearing the worst time of my life being read out loud really affected me and brought out a lot of feelings of guilt and shame. It made me realize that I hadn't even began to process what happened last Christmas, or why, and I contacted a therapist the next day. Sam moved in the day before my first appointment. It was awkward, but she was busy organizing her new room, so I just left her to it. That night we ordered pizza and watched a movie. It was nice. I met the therapist the next day and explained the situation. He thought the whole thing was a bad idea, but as we were now living together he agreed to help us navigate things as smoothly as possible. He thought couples therapy would be the best option. Sam and I have seen him every week since then, and gone through our entire relationship. After 4 miscarriages, the last 2 at 12+ weeks, absolutely wrecked Sam's mental health. I started cooling on the idea of continuing to try for a child. Instead of talking to Sam, she so desperately wanted to be a mom I thought it would break her. I just pulled away from her. Of course she noticed and blamed herself and began spiraling. Couple this with undiagnosed bipolar disorder and the hormone issues which resulted from the IVF, and it was a recipe for disaster. Sam thought, possibly correctly, that I wanted out of the relationship but was too cowardly to come out and say it, so I just checked out and waited for her to get sick of me. The whole Tom situation was the straw that broke the camel's back, and she gave up fighting for our marriage and let me get out guilt-free. In therapy I've learned to accept my responsibility for the breakup of our marriage. I wasn't a good husband towards the end, and it's a miracle Sam stuck around as long as she did. The time apart made me realize how much I still love her. We've agreed to try and embrace what's happened and be thankful it brought us to where we are now. Hopefully we've both learned lessons that will make our relationship stronger. I know I have. So we're now back living as a couple. I canceled the divorce, which was taking ages as Sam refused to engage with it. Our son was born on December 11th to 2 weeks earlier than expected, and he's absolutely perfect. I'm holding him as I write this. I know a lot of people who read my previous posts will be disappointed with how I've handled this, but at the end of the day we've only got one chance at life, and I honestly can't think of a better way to spend mine. Thanks for all your advice over the past year, and Merry Christmas. My wife gave birth to our son in December. She suffers from untreated bipolar disorder, and after Christmas she developed severe PPD. We agreed that she'd go and stay with her mom for a week as she was spiraling and needed a break. She never came back, and we're no longer in direct contact. Our last conversation was over a month ago and it didn't go well. She apparently has no interest in being in our son's life or even getting updates on him. As far as I know, she's still living with her mom 200+ miles away. I've been offered a secondment at my company's Swedish office covering maternity leave for a year. I want to take it, but I don't want to tell my wife, as she would likely try to throw a spanner in the works. I have my son's passport and original birth certificate. Can I just go without telling her? We also own a house together which I'd like to rent out while I'm away. If she turns up out of the blue and finds someone else living here, could she do anything? There's no mortgage and all the bills are in my name, but she's on the deeds. Update 4. I didn't go to Sweden on a whim with a baby and a hold all. I rang a solicitor the morning after I posted and got told, very bluntly, that if I took my son out of the country without Sam's written consent or a court order, it would be child abduction, even if she hadn't seen him in weeks and even if I had his passport in my hand. I felt sick, because the secondment start date was 3 weeks away and the clock was ticking. My first thought was to try one last time to get consent the easy way. I drove down to Sam's mom's. She opened the door and just stared at the car seat for a full 5 seconds like she was processing what it was. "She's asleep," I said, which was a lie, and obviously she wasn't. Her mom let me in and made tea and said Sam was resting, which turned out to mean she'd left the house first thing with no phone and no note. I left a letter and a copy of the offer letter for Sweden and a simple 1-page consent form I'd printed off. Her mom called me that night and said she'd shown Sam, and Sam had cried and said, "Do what you want," but wouldn't sign anything. 2 days later I got a letter from a high street firm acting for Sam, accusing me of trying to isolate a vulnerable mother from her support network and threatening an urgent application if I so much as drove within 5 miles of an airport. It felt surreal. This is the same person who hasn't replied to a text about her son in a month, and now I'm controlling? My solicitor said, "Fine. We'll issue our own application and let a judge sort it." I filled in a C-100 that night at the kitchen table with my dad walking the pram back and forth with his one good hip, and sent it by courier because I didn't trust first-class post. CAF case rang me 48 hours later. The officer was one of those people who can make you feel like you've got your life together by speaking softly. She took a safeguarding history and said they'd been unable to reach Sam but would keep trying. She asked me what I wanted and I said, permission to go to Sweden for a year with my son, and a live with order so I can actually be his dad without checking over my shoulder every time I push a swing. The first hearing was listed a week later over Teams. I dressed in a shirt and tie, then changed back into a hoodie when the baby puked down my collar 5 minutes before the start. It was me, my solicitor, the judge, CAF case, and an empty square with respondent, Mrs., surname, that never lit up. The judge read the CAF case safeguarding letter, looked at me down the camera and asked if I was prepared to facilitate contact. I said yes. I'd offered video calls twice a week for a month and gotten nothing back, but I'd keep trying. He asked where we'd live in Sweden, who would help, what I'd do if the baby got sick. My employer had already sorted a service department in Stockholm, and there's a colleague with a toddler who'd said she could show me the ropes. My mom had also volunteered to come for the first fortnight to help me find my feet. She pretended she wasn't crying when I told the judge that it failed miserably. He made an interim live with order in my favor, a specific issue order granting permission to remove my son from England and Wales for the duration of the secondment with a return date, and directions for CAF case to do a full Section 7 report. He made it conditional on me providing Sam with fortnightly updates, an address, and a contact phone number, and offering video calls twice a week at set times. He also added a line that made my stomach drop. If Sam asked to see him in person, I had to make best endeavors to facilitate reasonable contact when I was back in the UK for hearings. When we clicked leave, I stared at the end screen and shook. My solicitor said, "That was about as good as it gets in your situation. Now don't be a prat and rub it in." The house was the next problem. My plan had been to rent it out to cover bills, but my solicitor said I couldn't lawfully grant a tenancy without Sam's consent because she's on the title, and if I did it anyway I'd be inviting a row I didn't have time for. I emailed Sam's solicitors a sensible proposed arrangement, a reputable agent, rent split 50-50 after costs. They came back saying Sam wanted exclusive use of the house while I was away and would I mind paying the council tax and utilities. I told them very politely to do one, then decided to leave the place empty. I locked every window, put timers on the lights, got a monitored alarm, and stuck everything that wasn't nailed down in the spare room. It felt ridiculous, like I was baby-proofing for burglars. We flew out a week later. The baby screamed for the first 20 minutes then fell asleep, mouth open, limp, total trust. I sat there with a court order in my backpack and felt more terrified than I had in my entire life. Stockholm in late winter is grey and polite. The company flat had blue IKEA plates and a sofa that turned into something pretending to be a bed. The cot I ordered arrived flat packed and I messed the slats up twice. The first night he was sick at 3 a.m. and I stood on the balcony in my boxer shorts holding him against my bare chest because some article told me skin to skin helps, and watched faint snow drift down like ash. It was hard. It was also stupidly lovely. We went to open baby groups where the Swedish parents sang songs with actions and I clapped out of time. I learned the words for nappy and pram and coffee, in that order. My colleague showed me how to layer him properly so I didn't overheat him and then had to strip him down in a mall while he screamed like someone was sawing off his leg. I sent Sam a photo of him every morning and every evening and a paragraph about his day, whether she replied or not. At first it felt performative, look how good I'm being, then it just became routine, like brushing your teeth. Twice a week I clicked a Zoom link at the exact times in the order and stared at the waiting room until it disappeared. She never joined. 2 weeks in, I got an email from her mum saying, "Please ring me." I braced for a rant about kidnapping and instead she told me Sam had been admitted under Section 2 over the weekend after she tried to walk into traffic. She was safe, she didn't want me to tell anyone. "She's very unwell," her mum said, and the way she said it made my head go light, because mixed in with the anger and the paperwork and the indignation I'd genuinely forgotten that this might just be illness and not malice. I asked if I could visit. Her mum said Sam had said no, and then changed her mind, and then said no again. I sent a photo of our son asleep with his fist sticking up like a badly received salute. "He's beautiful," she wrote back, "thank you for looking after him." At the first directions hearing about the Section 7, Sam actually dialed in. I almost didn't recognize her. She'd cut her hair brutally short and looked fragile and wired at the same time. She stared at me and then at the baby on my lap and said, "I thought you'd stop sending photos if I ignored you. I want you to stop." The judge asked if she wanted any contact. She said no, then maybe in 6 months, then started crying. The judge ordered that I must continue to offer video calls at the same times but that it was fine if they weren't taken up, and that CAF case should focus on long-term arrangements and not push any interim contact that would destabilize her. Sweden started to settle into a pattern. Work was good. The secondment project made sense to my brain in a way nothing else did. My manager was Swedish in the most Swedish way possible and politely insisted I'd take a proper lunch and go home at 4 if I'd been up all night. We got invited to a colleague's house for midsummer and my son wore a flower crown for exactly 11 seconds before he shredded it and ate a petal. I danced around a pole pretending to be a frog and felt like a fraud and then, oddly, not at all. In June I flew back for the full hearing. I left my son with my mum who flew up to Stockholm just to be there and we all cried at Arlanda like idiots. In court, Sam looked better. She wore a cardigan I remembered, and shoes too big with the backs trodden down. She said she was on new medication and in therapy and that she wanted space and didn't know what that looked like yet. CAF case recommended the live with order in my favor be made final, with the specific issue permission to remain in Sweden until the end of the secondment and a plan for a gradual reintroduction of contact when she was ready. The judge adopted it, almost word for word. He asked about the house. My solicitor said it was empty and we were bleeding money. Sam said she didn't want to sell. The judge told us both off like naughty children and suggested mediation under Talata to either agree a sale or one of us buying the other out. After the hearing, in the corridor, Sam said, "You can buy me out if you want," like she was asking me to pass the salt. I said yes, and my brain immediately started calculating what I could get from the bank in September when I got my bonus. Back in Sweden, life kept happening. He started sleeping like an actual human. His laugh arrived, a proper belly laugh that he used mostly when I sneezed or dropped anything. We found a little park with a slide that made him static why so his hair stuck up and old ladies smiled at us like they knew a secret. I kept sending the photos in little paragraphs. Sometimes I got nothing. Once, at 2 in the morning, I got "He looks like you around the eyes." I lay there with the phone on my chest and felt something unclench. In August I got a padded envelope forwarded from my old address. No return address. Inside was a USB stick and a post-it, "For your records." H. I knew who H was before I slotted it in. It was Helen. The stick had 2 folder names, dates from a year and a half ago. One was audio, office Christmas drinks, that bar near the station, a half-hour snippet of Sam and Tom at a table and a sound that could have been a chair, scraping or could have been a kiss if you wanted it to be. The other was screenshots of Teams chats where Tom told Helen to drop it and stop making trouble, and Sam told him she couldn't do this again. I watched and listened and realized, very calmly, that it didn't matter. I ejected the stick, put it back in the envelope, and then a day later walked it to a bin and got rid. That story ended the day my son arrived and started a new one whether I wanted it or not. 2 weeks ago, Sam asked for a call. No solicitors, no Teams, just a number that started with the right area code. I propped my phone against a bag of flour on the kitchen counter and put him in his bouncer and answered. She looked ordinary. Hired in a normal way. She asked me what he liked to eat and I said pears and the wooden spoon. She said she'd like to see him at Christmas if that was okay. I said yes, of course, and suggested we plan something simple and public and low pressure when we're back for the final review hearing in December. She nodded and said, "I'm not ready to be his mum yet," and I said, "Then don't be. Be Sam." She cried and I cried and he blew a raspberry and then we laughed like idiots. We're working through the house sale. The buyout has turned into a sale because I did the sums and it made more sense to split and both start fresh. An estate agent went round last week and sent me glossy pictures of rooms I decorated with paint on my hands and IKEA instructions on the floor, now empty and echoing. We've agreed a price, subject to her actually signing the TR1 when it lands. For the first time in a long time, I think she will. I'm writing this at a kitchen table that doubles as a desk and a landing strip for muslin cloths, in a flat that smells like coffee and Sudocreme. My son is asleep in his cot with one sock off because he can smell when I put the second sock on and wakes up purely to protest. I have a court order pinned to a corkboard and a calendar with a return flight in December circled. I have a little routine where I send a picture to a number that might not respond for a week and I'm okay with that. I don't know if I'll extend my time here or come home in January and work out life in Yorkshire as a single dad with a sold house and a cautiously reappearing co-parent who used to be my wife. I do know that last Christmas I was convinced the rest of my life had been ruined by a woman holding hands with a man in a train station. This Christmas I'll be dancing around a living room in a country I'd never been to with a 1-year-old who thinks I'm a god because I can make a noise with my lips. It's not what I planned, but it's the plan I've got, and for the first time in a very long time that feels enough. Update 5. I flew back with him on the week before Christmas like I'd circled on the calendar, 2 cabin bags, a pram that folds in a way that terrifies airport security, and a court order tucked into my backpack in a plastic sleeve like a school project. He was an angel through security and then absolutely lost his mind at the gate because I wouldn't let him lick the rubber wheel of the chair we were sat on. My mum met us at arrivals with a bottle of Calpol and a fleece blanket she insists has magical properties because it belonged to my older sister in 1997. He laid his head on her collarbone the way he used to on mine and she made a sound like someone was wringing the air out of her. We went home to their house and the tree was already up and the living room looked exactly the same as it did when I was 15 except smaller. I had that weird dislocated feeling of being a parent and a child at the same time, like you've put on a coat that doesn't quite fit either way you wear it. The review hearing was on the 20th, back at the court with the dodgy coffee machine that takes your pound and gives you a cup of something that tastes like melted shoe. It was in person this time. I wore a suit that I'm pretty sure was the same one I wore to my wedding and pretended it didn't feel like a bad joke. Sam came. I knew she was there before I saw her because her mum was outside the door having a quiet cry and I recognized her handbag. Sam looked steadier. Let's go with that. The CAF case officer had written a measured, kind report that made me cry in the loos when I first read it on my phone because it was the first time an official document had described me as doing a good job at anything that mattered. They recommended making the live with order final, keeping the permission to remain abroad until the end of the secondment, and setting out a roadmap for contact that starts with indirect and moves to short, supported in person once Sam and her team think she's ready. The judge nodded a lot and then read the whole thing into the record like it was a bedtime story for a very niche audience of 2 exhausted adults and 1 child in a pram eating his own sock. He made the order, almost word for word, added that any extension to the secondment needed either Sam's written consent or a further application, and reminded me to keep doing what I was doing with the updates and the calls. He turned to Sam and told her he was impressed with the work she'd done to get on top of things and that the court wasn't going anywhere, we could come back if we needed to. It felt oddly like being patted on the head and told to get on with it, which is probably what we both needed. We had a plan to see each other the afternoon after the hearing. We'd set it up in advance by email like a business meeting. 45 minutes, neutral place, no surprises. We ended up in a garden center cafe because it was halfway between my parents and Sam's mums and because English people feel safe near poinsettias and overpriced mince pies. It wasn't cinematic. There were plastic reindeer. Sam arrived 10 minutes late and apologized twice, once to me and once to the baby, which she called by his name like she was trying it on for size. She sat down and I could see the tremor in her hand stop and start when she picked up her cup. I said, "No pressure," and meant it. He stared at her the way he stares at anyone new and then reached for the sparkly cardboard snowflake she had sticking out of her hair and crumpled it. It made us both laugh. After 5 minutes of awkward chat about nothing, the weather, there was a flurry in the morning, the cafe, it was too hot, she asked if she could hold him. I said yes and stood up because I didn't know whether to hand him over like a rugby ball or a bomb. He sat on her knee and patted her cardigan with his palm and then tried to climb down after a wooden train on the floor. She looked at me like she'd forgotten how heavy a child is and then like she'd remembered, and tears came to the corner of her eyes without falling. "He smells like biscuits," she said, and I said, "That'll be the baby rice cakes that taste like cardboard and lies." We did 40 minutes and then we stopped because we said we would, not because anyone stormed off or had to, and I took him to the car and strapped him in and she stood 6 feet away and said, "Thank you," in a way that made it sound like I'd lent her something valuable and she was returning it in one piece and couldn't believe her luck. Christmas Day was quiet. My dad put the Queen on the telly by force of habit and then we all remembered. My mum gave him a fabric book that crackles when you squish it and he lost his mind over it for a good hour like it was the first book ever printed. Sam texted at 11 saying she didn't think she could manage a park meet and I said that was okay and meant it. On Boxing Day, she messaged and asked if she could come to my parents for half an hour on the driveway if her mum came. I checked with my mum, who immediately started shouting "Hoover the hall" at my dad like the Prime Minister was coming. They pulled up outside, Sam got out and stood with her hands in the pockets of a coat I bought her 3 Christmases ago, and we did 10 minutes of "Look at your little feet." And yes, he does this thing with his tongue now. My dad waved from the bay window like an excited Labrador. It was small and strange and not nothing. The house completed in January after a predictably daft delay where the TR1 got stuck on someone's desk because the person who needed to witness Sam's signature was on annual leave and no one in the office could work out where the special pen was they used to sign deeds. I signed my bid at the Swedish embassy in a room that smelled faintly of laminate and hand sanitizer while a man in a gray suit checked my passport 3 times and then asked me how I was finding the winter. "Cold," I said, and he said, "Yes," with a look that suggested I had just unlocked Nordic knowledge. Solicitors emailed each other long letters about indemnity insurance and boiler servicing certificates while I sat on a playmat and tried to stop my son eating a plug. The money landed in my account at 3:12 p.m. on a Thursday, an obscene number coming out of the blue like a mistake that the bank would correct at any minute. I sent Sam her half within 20 minutes because if I stared at it any longer I'd find a way to feel weird about it. I set up a junior ISA for the baby like 10 different people had told me to, transferred a chunk to it, and then sat on the edge of my bed in a city I didn't live in 6 months ago and cried, because it felt like I'd finally closed the door to somewhere that had been standing open, letting all the heat out. Sweden in January and February is a long gray hallway with a light at the end you're convinced is a trick until suddenly it isn't. Work ticked along. The project hit that phase where everything is boring and important at the same time and you have to concentrate or you build a system that emails invoices to your own personal inbox for a month and no one notices until year end. I found an English-speaking open preschool further from the flat that does a sing-along on Wednesdays and learned the hand actions to a song about a bus that my son is now obsessed with to the point where if I don't make the whoosh noise properly for the doors he looks like he's going to call social services. He said ball and something that sounds like the Swedish for car and might just be him sneezing. I sorted out a GP, learned the number for the healthcare helpline by heart after I walked into a doorframe one day with him on my hip and he bumped his head, and got lectured in very polite Swedish about furniture corner protectors. We fell into a routine that I could find in the dark. The email about an extension to the secondment arrived at the end of February. My manager wrote something very flattering about my work and then in the same breath said he wouldn't be offended if I said no because of family reasons, which is the most Swedish way of saying you've got a lot on I've ever seen. I read it twice and then rang my solicitor because I could hear the judge in December in my head saying I'd need consent or a new order. It turned into 2 parallel jobs at once, making the grown-up decision about where to live for another 6 months with a 1-year-old, and sending an email to someone I had loved for years asking if she would let me. I wrote to Sam. I attached the draft letter from my employer. I set out the days I'd be back in the UK for hearings and visits. I offered to cover her travel if she wanted to come out for a week with her mum to see where we live. I said if she didn't feel able to consent that was okay and I'd make an application and the court could decide. It took 3 days for her to reply, which might also have been 3 years. She said, "I don't know." An hour later she wrote again and said, "Yes, if you keep the updates and can come back for a week in May," and signed her name. My solicitor told me to print it and put it in a drawer and email her firm for a more formal letter just in case. Her firm wrote back 2 weeks later with a 1-page letter saying she consented to an extension until August without prejudice to her seeking to vary arrangements in future. I exhaled like a tire with a nail in it. There were bumps. One Friday night in March my phone pinged at 11 with a long message from Sam that started, "I've changed my mind," and ended, "You stole my life." I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher and read it twice and then didn't reply until the morning because my therapist in my head said, "Don't play table tennis with a grenade." In the morning she wrote again and said she'd had a rough night and asked me to ignore the previous message, and I said I wouldn't ignore it, but I wouldn't make decisions based on it either. It's amazing how many sentences you can build around that sounds really hard without lying. A week later she sent a voice note of herself reading half a board book and stopping because she cried in the middle. I played it to him anyway and he babbled at her voice like he always does and then tried to eat the phone. Sam sent a selfie the next day of her in a waiting room with a blood pressure machine and a sign behind her about lithium monitoring and gave me a half smile that said, "I'm doing it. Keep up." I wrote, "Proud of you," and meant it. Helen popped back up once in a way that made me feel like I'd stood in a patch of cold air. A padded envelope forwarded on from my old place in Yorkshire with no return address and another USB stick, because she's nothing if not committed to a theme. I didn't even plug it in this time. I threw it into the bin in the communal hallway and immediately felt guilty in case it had something I'd need one day, which is how you end up on Channel 5 being rescued from under a pile of newspapers. I walked back out and pulled it from the bin and then pushed it into the postbox addressed to my solicitor with a note that said, "If this is anything that could ruin my life, please keep it. If it's people snogging at a bar, throw it away." He emailed to say it wasn't relevant to any of the proceedings and he disposed of it. A week later I got a connection request on LinkedIn from Tom with a message that said, "No hard feelings." I stared at it for a long time like it was an exotic insect and then declined. Sometimes closure looks like a polite no, thank you. We came back for a week at the end of May like I'd promised. It rained every day in that very British way where the sky can't be bothered to pick a side, so it just spits. We did 2 short meets at a contact center round the corner from a primary school that smelt like crayons and disinfectant where the woman on reception had a voice like honey and rules like a prison warden. Sam turned up both times. The first time she sat on the edge of the playmat and didn't touch anything and then reached for a toy and looked at me like she was asking permission. The second time she held him for 10 minutes and he tugged at her necklace and she startled and then relaxed and then he did that deep baby sigh you only get when their whole body gives in, and she sat very still like she was keeping a bird from flying away. We arranged nothing beyond those 2 hours, because if I've learned anything it's that making plans too far into the future is a way of proving to yourself you can't see it from here. Work is work. My manager asked me last week if I wanted to stay permanently and I said I'd let him know after August. I don't think I will. I love the place, the kindness built into the way people exist here, the fact that the supermarket sells hot dogs and people just stand around eating them like it's the most normal thing in the world. I love the lake near our flat that turns into a mirror at 9 p.m. and makes my son squeal when ducks land like small planes. But I also stood in my parents' back garden in May with a baby monitor hissing gently next to the herb bed and listened to him breathe through a wall I know the thickness of, and thought about a little rented place near a mediocre park in Yorkshire that I could make hours in a boring, holy sort of way. I thought about my mum popping round with a casserole and the way my dad will teach him to cheat at cards. I thought about the co-parenting we haven't even really started yet because all we've been doing is laying down the ground to eventually start, and how it might be easier to hand your son to his mum for an hour on a Tuesday in a room where they say Tara at the end of conversations and mean it than on a WhatsApp call where your face looks like a mask. For now, I pack a little backpack every morning with nappies and wipes and a tiny denim jacket with a hood and we go out into a city that is not mine and manages to make me feel like it could be. He kisses the window when it rains. He bites a pear like it offended him. I send 2 photos a day to someone who used to be my wife and now is just the person who helped make the best thing that's ever happened to me. Sometimes she writes back straight away and sometimes she doesn't for a week and sometimes the only thing she sends is a link to a lullaby I didn't know and I play it and he falls asleep halfway through the second verse and I stand in the kitchen with my hands on the edge of the counter and breathe. If you'd told me 18 months ago that I'd be stood in a flat in Stockholm at midnight, wearing a t-shirt with banana puree on the shoulder, filling out a direct debit for a contact center in Leeds while a court order curls on a corkboard behind me and a baby snores through a baby monitor that lights up blue when he sighs, I'd have asked what I did to deserve it like it was a punishment. It doesn't feel like that now. It feels like a life. I'm trying my best not to get ahead of myself with decisions. August will come and we'll make one. If you need me in the meantime, I'll be at a Wednesday sing-along clapping on the wrong beat, or on a rainy British driveway passing my son from one careful pair of hands to another, or in a courtroom being told to grow up by a judge who has probably seen it all and somehow still believes people can do better. It's not the story I thought I was in, but it's the one we've got, and we're writing it one small, boring miracle at a time.